I try and stress when starting a sculpt to not worry too much about the little things. Go in and commit some nice big strokes as soon as you can, to really start to build out lighting rather than trying to worry about details. So think about how this little dude would start lighting when you squint your eyes. If you zoom out this far, what does he look like? Does he start to look like the character yet? Don't ever think about, don't sweat the little details. Just get in there and beat it up a little bit. It's a metric ton of different tools you can use to do it. I use trim a lot. I use standard brush a lot. Standard is a very simple displacement. It doesn't really do any crazy tricks, but takes alphas and everything pretty well. So I do a lot of my early sculpting with the standard brush. Shift key always works as smooth in any Z-add brush. And in fact, any RGB brush works as a blend. So the move tool I use a whole hell of a lot, and actually this is something that I will never stop using as far as like parts of my timing of my sculpt. So when I get to a high res, I still use the move tool just as much as any other, but I use it right away to start really defining major shapes as much as possible on the lower res, and really committing to good silhouette, always rotating around, checking out where things look right, look wrong. To me, this guy looks like he probably has a pretty thick back of his skull, so I'm going to try and exaggerate that a little bit by bringing in the neck. And again, I'm doing a lot of move tool. And when you use the move tool, as long as you're using just a normal drag on the verts, it pulls in screen space. So it's pulling left, right, up, down relative to your screen as you've oriented it. But if you use Alt as a function while dragging, it will actually drag along the vertex normal. So you'll see as the plane of the brush changes, you can see it kind of curling around the model. That's actually telling you the direction that your brush is going to pull when you use Alt on the move tool. So you'll note now it's pulling out to the side from that angle. If I bring it facing me, you can see it's pulling out directly towards me, as opposed to always, I'd have to do that normally. I'd have to rotate to the side and pull out. So it works on the average normal, which is a pretty big deal. That's a great thing to work on silhouettes. You can, it's one thing once you're in perspective, which I would encourage everyone to use as much as possible. Perspective view makes it a little bit harder to grab verts that are on the opposing side. So on this side, it's harder to grab the verts that are. You can still see them, but you don't reach around very well. That sentence isn't very good. That's not a very good sentence to put together. Sorry about that, guys. So as you move around, you can actually, instead of trying to grab it on the right side here, I can grab it on the left side. Well, my right and left on his, whatever, you get the idea. So where my cursor is here, I can actually take this and pick the verts that I want to affect since I'm mirroring, and move on the normal and watch the other side. So I can watch this side and decide what that shape should be. That's how I do a lot of my moves, is moving the opposite side and watching the side that I want to actually manipulate with perspective on. Alright. So again, back to standard a little bit, give it a little bit more, just gesture in a little bit more lighting, pull out a little bit, push back. Alt always pushes back a normal, well, not always actually. When you're in Z-add mode, you'll see up here there's a Z-add is the function to additively manipulate the model, which is basically the equivalent of dumping clay or smooshing clay onto a sculpt. So as I drag, it pulls out, and if I hold Alt, it changes to Z sub. You don't see it change here, but that's it basically inverts whatever your selection is. So Alt pushes away. So that's like removing clay from a sculpt. So again, just going in and kind of gesturing in, where I can see some lighting here that's looks like a little bit more heavy-handed. Doing it on the lowest res I can possibly muster, so that as I step up, I don't have to. The more verts you have, the harder it is to get those shapes to really come clean. So really, try not to step up unless you need more verts. Like here, I couldn't have added this little the angular sort of toothy upper jaw that's going on there without stepping up a level. But the earlier you commit detail into a model, the easier it is to clean it up later, like on the higher resolution. So if I step up now, I can add in just that extra layer of crispness on the next resolution, and not actually need to go much higher to get these shapes really coming in and representing what I want. Even though actually that's a little thick. So here's an example of where I would want to use trim. Trim dynamic is a really fast way to tear into a model. It sort of does a flatten function, and it's averaging over the normals of what you're stroking. So you can see it when I push back, it's removing a lot of material, but it's also trying to keep it to a flat plane. This is one of my more useful, one of the more useful tools that I've been using lately. So here's another example of where I would really want, like right now, I feel like those eyes, kind of from the concept, I feel like that head shape is a lot thinner than what I've got represented right now. So again, I'm always happy to make a mess of it. It's similar to Photoshop. If you commit everything to a bunch of layers, you're never gonna get your hands dirty. You're never gonna get those big sweeping changes. So in this case, I'm saying, like, I don't think that I've represented this head appropriately. So I'm going to pull the eyes in, and it's making a little bit of a mess. And the whole shape there got a little bit too tight as far as the polygons go. But I'm not worried about that. These are all things that we can fix later with new topology. And if you're not familiar with that, it's the idea of rebuilding a mesh with the purpose of either having a cleaner geometry or something more appropriate to what you're sculpting. So I guess if the idea where these wrinkles in the neck, if I don't have polygon loops following those shapes, I have to go to a higher resolution in order to sculpt them. So let me just step up. So here, if I had polygon loops that were following that shape, you wouldn't get quite as much stepping. So basically the idea is that later on we can break it down and say, okay, well now I want to commit and start doing wrinkles, doing micro detail, but I don't want to go to level 8 to do it. So we can rebuild it then.